Ministers, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you and a very warm welcome to Glasgow and Renewable UK's Global Offshore Wind Conference. I'm Maria McCaffrey, I'm Chief Executive of Renewable UK, so it's my great pleasure to be the first to welcome you this morning. But before I can start our formal proceedings at conference, I'm going to ask the audio-visual professionals up there to play a very short audio clip with important health and safety information. It takes less than 30 seconds, I'm assured, but it is important, and I would be grateful if you'd give it your full attention, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a brief announcement which is made in the interest of public safety. We do not anticipate any problems, but should an emergency occur, the following emergency evacuation message will be broadcast. This is an urgent announcement. An emergency situation has arisen. Please leave the building in an orderly manner by the nearest available exit as directed by SECC staff.
True to the promise? And so, an especially warm welcome to those of you who've travelled from overseas to be with us this morning. I believe we have an excellent programme ahead of us, and we're starting, as we mean to go on in our opening session, with two very experienced government ministers and our own new chairman of Renewable UK. So I'm delighted to welcome both the UK Business and Energy Minister, the Right Honourable Michael Fallon, Member of Parliament, and Fergus Ewing, Member of the Scottish Parliament, who's Minister for Energy with the Scottish Government. And to complete our opening lineup and to chair this opening session, we have Julian Brown, Arriva Wind's Country Director for the United Kingdom and Chairman of both Renewable UK and Norstec. Now, none of these gentlemen are strangers to Renewable UK conference platforms, and we're delighted to have them all back with us. But it isn't only at our own events that they've been visible in this sector. As many of you know, Fergus Ewing has long been a champion of the offshore wind sector and has this year alone authorised the first consents for commercial offshore wind farms in Scotland and confirmed the Beatrice wind farm in the Moray Firth will receive a contract for difference in the new EMR regime. So the future for offshore wind in Scotland is bright, and we look forward to hearing more from you on that, Minister, in a few minutes. In Westminster, Michael Fallon has also been instrumental in driving forward the offshore wind sector since his appointment at the Department for Business, Innovation and Skills with responsibility for low carbon in September 2012, and his subsequent appointment to Minister of State at the Department for Energy and Climate Change last year, as demonstrated by the offshore wind industrial strategy he launched last summer. So with the common goal of not just to generate an abundant supply of homegrown clean energy, but to create tens of thousands of jobs and to attract hundreds of billions of pounds of investment and industrial benefit to the United Kingdom. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from both political keynotes this morning. So just before I do hand over to our chairman, I'd just like to say a few but very important words of thanks. First of all, I'd like to say a big thank you to all of you for being with us this morning and for choosing to support the work your industry association does with the support of your attendance and your participation, and to particularly thank our sponsors for their generous support of this year's event. And they include UK Trade and Investment, Gowlings, ABB, Siemens, RES, KBR, Fred Olsen Wind Carrier, ESS Ecology, CROC, DNVGL, and KIC Inno Energy. I think they deserve a big, warm round of applause. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please give a very, very warm welcome to the UK Country Director for Arriva Wind and our very own Chairman, Julian Brown. Julian, over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody. A few practical things, first of all. Mobile phones, You know the routine. Twitter. Does anyone know what Twitter is? We'll be tweeting on Global Offshore 2014, and please also contribute your own tweets. So, first of all, thank you very much, Maria. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Global Offshore Wind 2014. Great to be here back in Glasgow. My thanks again to Ministers Michael Fallon and Fergus Ewing for joining us and for taking time out of their busy schedules to kick off our conference. My special thanks also to Charles Hendry for his work as ambassador for this conference. And Charles has been doing a lot of work in the background over the last months, really to raise awareness and get some of the profile for our conference in advance. So thank you to Charles. This is kind of an exciting day for me personally. My first time as chairman to get to address the conference. This is scary as for me, probably as much as it is for you. In particular, I think it's poignant that this is, in taking on this chairman role, I'm the first chairman from the supply chain, the equipment manufacturing side of the industry through the life of the Trade Association. I think this is symptomatic of the development of our industry in its maturing cycle. And it's on that note I really want to set the tone for the conference. At the risk of sounding a bit sort of strictly come dancing, we're all on renewables is all on a journey. That journey doesn't necessarily have an end, because that's kind of terminal, but it takes us to a different place. And the whole point, I think, now is for us to understand where the next place that we need to be. And it seems to me, all renewables is on that journey towards standing in its own merit against other methods of electricity generation. Just going back, when I was first involved in Kentish Flats in 2002, it would have been pretty hard to imagine where we might be now, 12 years later. We've demonstrated that offshore wind really is a great way to generate electricity. It's already changed the landscape of generating portfolio across the UK. So already, we've made amazing progress. Now let's start to think about the next part of our journey. It seems to me that we should drive and continue to lobby that renewables should stand on its own merit, and obviously cost and grid parity is a key element of that, but also, just as important, security, environmental impact, and the economic opportunity that renewables and offshore wind in particular can bring are the headings under which we must build a strong case for why we should do more offshore wind and make it an even bigger part of our portfolio. We should remember, of course, that onshore wind is rather closer to that destination than the offshore sector. And the learning and benefit of experience from onshore gives a huge opportunity for us to draw from that from the offshore sector. But it's not necessarily an easy path. We should also be aware of the challenges onshore is currently experiencing, so close to being competitive in its own right, and yet it's still has a transition to make towards being seen as part of the portfolio and standing in its own merit. Most importantly, offshore wind has got one of the clearest roadmaps we can imagine to what it's got to do and what can be achieved. Most industries would envy that level of clarity. Let's just think about the last 12 months. We have actually got quite a lot to celebrate that has been achieved since we last came to conference. We've seen the opening of the world's largest wind farm. I can't remember who made the turbines, but maybe some of you will be able to remember. I'm sure they're very good. There's a total of 3.6 gigawatts of installed capacity in UK waters, which is really, when you step back and think about it, is an astonishing number. CFDs have been awarded for up to 3 gigawatts of capacity. And Siemens and ABP's announcement of investment at Hull was greatly received by the whole industry, me included. Fantastic news, and I think really sets a leadership example to those of us in the supply chain for what we have to do and what is needed to build this industry. EMR has largely been implemented, and expectations going forward are much clearer. But there's also been some tougher moments during 2013-2014. We've had to come to terms with a lower than hoped for outlook. The good news is gone are those dreadful graphs that go up and up and up and then disappear at 2020. So we now have an opportunity to think differently about that profile and the opportunity going forward. It was tough when CFD pricing and availability of the FID contracts left some developers disappointed and left them uncertain even about their interest in maintaining and going forward in the offshore wind sector. And we saw the fallout of some individual projects where just the technology challenges, the geographical situation made them very difficult to maintain going forward. So we've seen actual projects drop out of the portfolio. But overall, I think the year was a reflection of the maturing process. When you think about it and step back, so many of the things we've experienced are those that you would expect to happen in a maturing industry. And those of you, I guess most of you, went through your teenage years and came out the other side. You remember that that was quite a tough period, possibly for your parents as much as for you. And so I see the parallels into what we're experiencing in our industry now. So I do think it's important to reframe, remind ourselves of the potential. The size of the prize of building this industry is still extraordinary. So let's not forget that. We have the wind resources. The UK leads on the technology, the know-how and the experience for building offshore wind farms. In the new scenarios, and there are many of them, but we're still likely to see 45,000 jobs in the UK, direct jobs in the industry, up from 13,000 existing. So this is still a major growth opportunity. And we have a better route now than ever before to establish a stable and sustainable level of project throughput supported by UK manufacturers or UK-based manufacturers and suppliers. So what's next? I think there is now we have great clarity through to 2020. We've got to consider life beyond that. We must continue to focus on our competitiveness. We must build consensus around the great work that was commenced in the first place by the Crown Estate Pathways Study and has now been followed through and maintained and built on by the Offshore Wind Programme Board. There's a huge opportunity to build consensus around a vision of what we can deliver in terms of cost of energy and supply chain. And then using that, we then can take our place alongside the other technologies to promote our capability. The industry has also got to create portfolios of projects where a cooperative approach is given, where we can transfer learning direct from one project to the next, not lose the wisdom that we've gained. We must find ways to pass that on. I think also importantly, it's been a tough year, I think, in terms of our relationship with DEC. Going forward, it's so important that we work closely with DEC and government team on the scenario modelling, using the latest insights we have on cost and the digression and where that can be to maximise the potential. And I believe clarity will come from our collaboration with our stakeholders and DEC, not just confrontation. Because energy will always be policy-driven, and that's something we obviously have come to terms with. So, in summary, I call on our members to continue the passion and drive that you show towards building this industry. Always remember, we have a responsibility to the communities that are investing and paying for our electricity. UK content is and will remain and always will be an important ingredient for the development of the UK industry. And it was great to hear the Dong CEO, Samuel Leopold, quote, "If Dong Energy are to work closely with suppliers and partners, then they shall create jobs in the UK." He clearly gets the plot. We must build consensus around what we can achieve, and then we have to work closely with government to build those credible scenarios for a long-term industry. That, for me, is the key that will drive investor confidence and enable us to plan for a sustainable future. Thank you. Enough from me. I'd now like to invite Michael Fallon, Minister of Energy from Westminster, to give us his keynote. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Julian, and good morning, and thank you very much for giving me the chance to speak to you today. And my apologies to you and to Fergus for having to leave fairly soon after I've spoken. Rather oddly, I have to get to Aberdeen in time to meet Fergus Ewing again. and he obviously has a different system of transport. It's always a pleasure to speak to a sector where the United Kingdom is a clear world leader. And don't just take my word for that. That was confirmed by the recent Ernst & Young Attractiveness Index. It's also good, personally, to be back home in Scotland in what is obviously a very important year, not just for Scotland, but also for the sector, which is now entering a new phase in its development. In the field of energy, as also so many other ways, Scotland benefits from being part of the United Kingdom, and as a result, Scotland is fast becoming one of the world's energy hubs with a thriving renewable energy industry. Since 2010, businesses have announced over £14 billion of investment in the renewables industry in Scotland, with the potential to support around 12,000 Scottish jobs. Underpinning that success is the support provided by the United Kingdom, by the taxpayers of Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland and England working together. It is the size of the UK economy, its single market, its integrated single market, its regulatory regime, and the scale of financial support that is provided to the low-carbon sector that has given businesses the right conditions to invest in the energy industries right across the United Kingdom. Working together as part of the UK creates better opportunities and more secure jobs in Scotland, and the offshore industry thrives here and will continue to thrive in the UK. Looking forward, as Julian said, our phase of policy development in electricity market reform is now nearly over, and we are into a new phase, looking to serious investors to do what they do best, which is to get on and build projects. Since our conference last year, I've always believed that actions speak louder than words, and I think it's just worth reminding ourselves of what has happened since that last conference, which I think demonstrates the government's commitment to the sector. The Energy Bill has become the Energy Act. That took time, but the legislation is now there in place, and that is the only way that we can address the legacy of underinvestment that we inherited. Throughout that legislative process, we listened to the offshore wind industry, we responded, and we made changes where you made a compelling case that changes were necessary. Secondly, we have the strike prices. We firmly believe now that the level of support provided for offshore wind is sufficient to support the levels of growth that the sector needs to drive cost reduction and to give confidence to the supply chain to invest, so as to build the successful British industry that is envisioned in our industry strategy. The WARE, of course, calls for still higher levels of support, but we have to ensure that our consumers get good value for money. I'm confident now that we've got that right and that the future is looking bright for offshore wind. Few other sectors can look forward to an almost threefold increase in deployment by the end of the decade. So I'd like to thank many of you here today for your involvement in that process. Your expertise and commitment, I think, has helped deliver a better outcome to the benefit of us all. Thirdly, investment contracts. We listened to your arguments about the uncertainty caused by the transition from the renewables obligation regime to the new contracts for difference. we accepted that there was a risk of investment hiatus as we finalised our reform, and we took action through the final investment decision enabling for renewables project. And that's been a huge success. 8 projects have signed investment contracts, including, of course, one in Scottish waters, the 664 megawatt Beatrice project. And those 8 projects are expected to bring forward up to £12 billion of private investment, and in themselves support 8,500 jobs. 5 of the 8 projects are for offshore wind. As well as being the first contracts released under EMR, they mark a new stage in the growth of this sector, bringing green jobs and growth across the UK, and of course supporting cleaner and more secure energy. And fourthly, last summer we launched the Offshore Wind Industrial Strategy, a long-term approach to supporting economic growth, which is being delivered by government and industry working in partnership with the strategic direction being set by the Offshore Wind Industry Council. The creation of the Offshore Wind Investment Organisation, one of the actions from the strategy, is now complete. It has a full team in place and is focusing on securing major new supply chain investments in priority sectors: turbines, substations, towers, foundations. I hope many of you are already working with that organisation to support our shared vision as set out in the strategy. I should also mention the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, which is headquartered in Glasgow and is so ably led by Andrew Jemison. The Catapult has an important role to play in helping companies develop and commercialise innovative technology, helping too to bring down costs in the sector and to stimulate economic growth. And it's been very rewarding to see the Catapult grow and develop its role over the past year. I was particularly interested to note the Sparta project, a collaboration programme between the Catapult, the Crown Estate and owners-operators. That's a fantastic demonstration, I think, of the industry coming together to share performance and maintenance data. I recognise that's not always easy, but it's by taking steps like that that the sector, I think, can help deliver the cost reductions and efficiency improvements that are so important. And we've also this year seen the Catapult boost its capability through a merger with Narek. Offshore wind, then, isn't just an energy sector, any old energy sector. It's a growth sector. I've already mentioned the strategy, and it's vital that as the offshore wind sector grows, it strengthens its contribution to economic growth and creating jobs here in the UK. That's already happening. Employment has doubled between 2011 and 2013. More than 6,000 people are directly employed in the industry, with a similar number of indirect jobs in wider supply chain. I am delighted that Siemens and ABP are jointly investing £310 million in turbine production and installation facilities in the Hull area, not just for the direct employment benefits that will bring to the Humber, up to 1,000 direct jobs, but also for the opportunities that that investment itself will open up for the wider supply chain. It'll be one of the largest investments on the Humber in the last 50 years. But it's also a demonstration that the UK is the market for this particular sector, and I think sends a very clear message to other manufacturers wanting to win UK business that they need to create jobs here as well. Overall UK content in our offshore wind farms can be and should be much higher, especially in capital expenditure. The Offshore Wind Industry Council has a key role to play in capturing the benefit of the offshore wind supply chain for the UK as a whole, enabling the investment that brings crucial jobs and growth to our country and supports homegrown businesses. To support that role, I can announce today that I've asked Matthew Chin to review the future of the UK offshore wind supply chain and to consider now what more industry and government can do to support its development. That review will help consolidate joint industry and government working, contributing to the further development of our industrial strategy, and will underpin the work of the Offshore Wind Investment Organisation. And I've asked Matthew to report back to me in the autumn. So I'm glad to note that the message is getting through about UK jobs and UK content, amply demonstrated by the investment in Hull. But that's also only a start. Under EMR, we are also requiring developers to prepare supply chain plans for the approval of the Secretary of State. They will need to show evidence that their projects will contribute to growth in the supply chain, and specifically how the projects will support the development of competition, how they will boost innovation, and critically, how they will boost skills. And I'm pleased to note that RenewableUK is holding the latest in their series of share fair events tomorrow morning so that suppliers can hear directly from major developers and from Siemens about their plans and the opportunities for companies to enter their supply chains. I'm also pleased to see that as of yesterday, DEC has now fully commenced the offshore transmission regime. That regime, having delivered and licensed 1.4 billion of infrastructure investment to date, with another 1.5 billion in the pipeline, gives Ofgem the tools it needs to secure investment in the connections for offshore wind power. Full commencement means that it is now able to cover more distant offshore wind developments and multiple delivery routes. That marks the end of several years' innovative design and implementation work in partnership with Ofgem eServe. And today, we are publishing the final guidance regarding the oil and gas clause in Crown Estate leases, detailing the backstop procedures for independent valuation where necessary. That should give, from now on, should give developers the reassurance that a lease or an agreement for a lease won't be taken away without appropriate compensation. Finally, a word about the future of this industry. Market certainty has probably been the major theme of my many discussions with the industry over the last year. In government, we are working hard to ensure that EMR is successfully implemented and ready to go this autumn with the first auctions for contracts for difference. We're supporting a significant volume of offshore wind deployment in this decade, which will lay the foundations for cost reduction and a stronger national supply chain. So this is an exciting stage in a sector that is expanding and which has the potential to play an even more important role in our economic future. So let me conclude by saying the energy sector, of course, is absolutely critical to any economy. It is vital as a country that we make the most of our indigenous energy resources. Within the United Kingdom's single market and integrated regime, we can achieve that. It is the United Kingdom regime that gives investors the certainty they need to deliver electricity generation at least cost to consumers. That will boost the economy and generate skills and expertise and thousands of jobs in this sector and across the entire United Kingdom as we reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. And Scotland, as part of the United Kingdom, is benefiting significantly from that economic boost. So I hope I'm leaving you with a very clear message that the British government, believes in this sector and has taken tangible steps to support it. If you continue to work with us to deliver the cost reduction and economic benefit, the future potential of this sector is hugely significant, and the United Kingdom will continue to remain a world leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Well, thank you for that stirring introduction to our conference, and particularly good news to hear we have progress on the oil and gas clause. So thank you for that update. And also we look forward to engaging with Matthew Chin on the supply chain study. Very, very important piece of work. Unfortunately, Michael has to leave shortly to head off for a train, as he mentioned, so we won't be able to take questions. But we'll stay for as much as he can to hear Fergus. Our next speaker is a man familiar to you all. Of course, we are back in his native Scotland. Fergus is the Minister of Energy for the Scottish Government. I believe he's able to take a few questions at the end, so please, while Fergus is speaking, think about things you'd like to ask. I'd like to welcome Fergus Ewing.
Well, thank you very much, Julian, and to Maria McCaffrey and Renewables UK, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And as a native son of the city of Glasgow, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this great city, and you have indeed come from all over the globe to be here. So a most special welcome to those of you who've come from far afield, from other countries, great friends that I've come to know from Norway, from Germany, from Holland, from France, from the USA, from China, from Japan, and from all over the world. You're all very welcome to Glasgow. And, you know, before I was a minister like Michael, I used to have a proper job. If you can call being a lawyer a proper job, that is. For I was a lawyer in the city of Glasgow, so let me start off with a bit of light entertainment about a story of a chap who finds himself in a court in Glasgow, charged with a minor crime of breach of the peace, and he's standing in the dock at the beginning of his trial and looking up at the judge, called the sheriff in Scotland, and the sheriff says to him, "Mr. MacDonald, this is a minor matter, but it could have very serious consequences for you. Do you have someone here to act as your solicitor on your behalf?" Mr. MacDonald replies by saying, "That won't be necessary. The good Lord will be my defender." At which the sheriff, looking down his half-moon spectacles with which they're issued on appointment, said, "Mr. MacDonald, I strongly urge you to find someone better known locally." I guess my task is that you know better what our approach is in the Scottish Government to renewable energy. And in short, our approach is wholehearted in support of renewable energy in Scotland. And that has led to the very substantial investment that you, as industrialists, have chosen to make in a country where you feel that you have that full-throated, full-blooded, unqualified support that will not disappear when the going gets tough and the newspapers write things that perhaps make some other politicians feart, which is a Scottish word for afraid. So I wanted just to begin by emphasising that support. And I believe it's that support which has led to the very substantial investment in Scotland. You take the credit for that investment, not me or any government. You make the investment decisions based upon an assessment of risk, and you do so where you feel that you will be welcome and you will be supported, not for the lifetime of a politician's government, 5 years, but for the lifetime of your projects, several decades. Now, I wanted to begin by outlining a number of the achievements over the sector, over the offshore wind sector over the past 12 months. In June 2013, new ROC bands were introduced to support offshore wind generation, 2.5 ROCs for test and demonstration sites, 3.5 ROCs for pilot projects consisting of non-fixed generation, e.g. floating turbines. Why did we do that? Well, because I had breakfast with Fred Olsen one morning. And you can learn a lot from people like Fred Olsen, people like me, humble Glasgow lawyers, who need to listen and learn from industry. And Fred said to me, you know, Scotland, you've got deeper waters. It's more expensive. You're the best place in the world to do wind energy, but you need to develop floating and innovative wind turbines for the long term. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the rationale for our decision to support, by the existing ROC mechanisms, the test and demonstration sites and floating and innovative turbines. In November 2013, the Crown Estate, with whom we work closely, agreed to lease to Statoil the next phase of its 30-megawatt floating turbine high wind project, 20 to 30 kilometres off the coast of Peterhead of northeast Scotland. We are straining every sinew to make sure that Statoil can successfully deliver that project for Scotland and the world. What a tremendous contribution it may well make to the future of offshore wind. In January 2014, the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult opened the doors of its new offices in Glasgow, and indeed Andrew Jameson, who heads it up, is here today. We all know that if we are to succeed, as I believe we will, you will, then cost reduction is essential. And cost reduction will happen, you know. Just 10 years ago, as Ian Marchant once told me, the most powerful wind turbine onshore was just around 1 megawatt. Look at it now. Look at the progress that's been made onshore. Of course, that progress will be made offshore, but we urgently need to see progress, and that is being championed by Andrew and his colleagues and many others. Also in January, Mainstream selected Siemens as the preferred supplier of wind turbines and appointed Marubeni and Technip Offshore Wind Limited, working in consortium, as the preferred supplier of balance of plant EPCI services for its proposed 450-megawatt Nartnagree offshore wind farm. In May 2014, I granted consent for the Murray Offshore Renewables and Beatrice Offshore Wind Farm, Morrell and Bowl, and the 326 wind turbines across the two projects could generate 1,866 megawatts of electricity, enough to power over 1 million homes and worth £2.5 billion to the Scottish economy. In March this year, DEC figures showed that renewable electricity energy in Scotland delivered a record-breaking 46% of our gross electricity consumption. 46%, on track to meeting our interim target of 50% by 2015 and 100% by 2020. 100% of what we consume, we will be generating far more than that. In May, the Kincardine floating offshore wind project submitted a scoping report to Marine Scotland, and also £6.5 million was announced for the development of a new quayside at Nick. And this is the first phase of a £40 million development which will offer 1,100 metres of quayside with deep water access for the offshore oil and gas sector. In May, Phase 2 of the proposed Nartnagree wind farm off Fife started with the siting of high-tech wind measuring equipment. Now, this progress, ladies and gentlemen, has taken place under the turbulent backdrop of the protracted process of completion of EMR, of the reforms to the electricity market. These have been many years in the making, and the aim has been that they should provide a framework for investment in renewables and other low-carbon generation over the next decade and beyond. And we have, in the Scottish Government, worked hard to influence these targets. It's fair to say that we think that they can be made to work. That has always been our view. But we do have reservations. The greatest of these relate to security of supply and, secondly, support for new nuclear power capacity, and contrasting that with a certain lack of ambition for the renewables sector. Above all, perhaps, however, the most important issue, we believe, is to give a long-term lead of confidence for the industry. We recommended that there should be a 2030 decarbonisation target, which would act as a driver to incentivise the investment that is required to achieve maximum potential of the industry. That proposal, although it found fairly strong support amongst various parties, was not supported. But nonetheless, we still believe that there does need to be a greater measure of support for the long-term future of the industry for it to succeed. Why is that? Well, it is because, as I discussed in a visit to Oslo at Home Common in January this year, it is because that we believe in the Scottish Government that by 2030 it should be the case that on and offshore wind will provide the least expensive method of delivering electricity to the grid. That is a shared vision which we have, which will only come about if we give sufficient support to the industry. So, long-term targets and commitments are fundamental to continued investment, and that is the approach that we will continue to adopt. Scotland has the potential to be a world leader in all stages of offshore renewable energy, from technological development to manufacturing to the generation of electricity. And as Minister, I spent a lot of time with our enterprise network in meeting with you, in discussing with you how we can work with you to see the industry succeed. My door is open to those of you whom I haven't met to engage with you. After all, those of you in Scotland pay my wages, so I have to try and earn them. And I'm very keen to work with you to make a success in Scotland on this. As the MSP for Inverness, if you're thinking of opening an office, then that's a very good place. But of course, throughout Scotland, there are so many opportunities for you to do business. Whatever part you play in the offshore wind sector, we have a willing group of communities, ports and harbours, companies, engineering facilities, colleges ready to help you to meet your skills challenge, to ensure that where there are regulatory burdens, planning permission, building warrant, getting things done, harbour consents, where there are problems, it comes to my desk. And although no minister in a democratic world has got a magic wand, you can be sure that I will do everything possible to overcome those type of problems if you choose to locate in Scotland. I just learnt from the Weir Group this morning that the very first engagement I did, which was at Carnegie College and campus for wind technicians, which we launched 3 years ago, the very first apprentice has emerged from Scotland from that course designed to help you as an industry. What a great thing. What a great thing. So, Alan Wilson, well done on behalf of the Scottish Government. And you know, Alan Wilson leads a great many because young people in Scotland are determined to play their part in this great industry. There is a huge desire in young people in Scotland to grasp the opportunities in the renewable sector because partly they see, of course, that that is the future for themselves and their children in this planet. I wanted also to touch on the fact that in marine planning we continue to seek efficiencies in the processes, licensing and consenting. I was in Aberdeen this week thanking the staff for the great work they do under some pressure. Of course, there are pending applications before me for decision in relation to offshore projects, and you will know that it is entirely wrong that I make any comment on any project, so I do not do that. But suffice to say that we recognise that a robust process is essential and that due expedition is also essential. We recognise the need to do things as quickly as we possibly can, and that drives forward all the work of government. To support the consenting regime, we are developing an updated licensing manual and licensing policy guidance to facilitate a simplified licensing system. We are updating our survey, deploy and monitor policy. We are planning for the future of offshore renewables around Scotland. There's a consultation reviewing 600 responses from the public. There's a lot more here. I won't read it out, but we're on the case. Now, I wanted to respond perhaps to Michael, with whom we're having a sort of double date today, as unlikely as it may seem. First of all, I would say that I seek to, and I think we do work closely together in the UK government. And I'd like just to begin by saying that, particularly in relation to achieving an increased strike price under CFD for the islands of Scotland, we recognise that that has been excellent joint working. It's delivered something which I hope will pave the way for the islands of Scotland to be connected. Now, many of you from countries that I've mentioned will have island communities, and you will know the problems they have of people leaving, never to come back because there's not opportunities in these islands. I see the potential connection of the Western Isles, Orkney and Shetland as the most important things that I seek to achieve. So I'm truly grateful to Ed Davey for the work that he's done thus far, and I'm determined that working together we will see it through, and we've agreed to form a delivery forum there and end. There's only 3 months to go to the referendum. I'm happy, if there are questions about this, to answer them later. But, you know, the essence of the case for Scotland to be an independent country is really very, very simple. Who better to run the affairs of a country than the people who live and work there? Who cares more about succeeding than the people who live and work in a country? And that is why the countries that I mentioned at the beginning have chosen independence, and independence is seen as the normal status for countries throughout the world. That fundamental truth underlies the debate. And in the event of a yes vote in September, we will, of course, work in partnership with the UK government. And in that respect, I believe that after the yes vote, we will see a continuance of the integrated UK energy market. That is the only sensible conclusion. We asked a group of experts to advise us on the regulatory framework post-independence. That work will be delivered shortly, headed up by Robert Armour and other experts in various fields. But we believe that the integrated UK energy market is the correct future for Scotland. Firstly, we export at present 11,000 gigawatt hours of electricity to England and Wales. We export 2,000 gigawatt hours of electricity to Northern Ireland. The UK imports 12,000 gigawatt hours of electricity from mainland Europe. Given that the capacity margin in the UK is down to a parlous 2%, it is clear that in England they will need all the supply they can get. In addition, Scotland's contribution, your contribution for renewables, is essential so that the UK, as well as Scotland, can meet their carbon emissions targets. Without Scotland, as Ed Davey has remarked himself, it will be difficult or impossible to achieve that. And thirdly, in relation to the supply chain represented substantially in this forum today. Our view in Scotland is that we want Scotland and the rest of the UK to succeed. We welcome the decision by Siemens to invest in Hull, as we do Siemens' decision to invest in Scotland. And therefore, we see the cross-border trading will continue without barriers, without impediments. The last thing I would say about this And I could say a lot more, and I'm happy to answer questions about this. But the last thing I would say about this is to put it this way. At present in Scotland, when it comes to formulating energy policy and driving it forward, if you think of the metaphor of a motor car, then the UK government are driving the car. And in the front, you've got DEC and you've got the Treasury. And sometimes they want to go to different destinations. But Scotland, at present, is in the back seat of that car. In fact, sometimes we feel as if we are in the boot of the car. And post-independence, we will be co-drivers of that car. And from your point of view, we will be a co-driver that is wholly signed up and committed to delivery of the success of your industry. Ladies and gentlemen, just my concluding remarks. We have in Scotland the research skills, the engineering expertise, the best natural resources in Europe to make Scotland a world leader in offshore wind, pioneering new technologies which will power Scotland and the rest of the world. We have a vision of what you can achieve if you get that full support that you deserve. What you do not need is a government that hesitates between the alternatives of providing full support and some support. There is a Scottish word called to swither. To swither means to hesitate between two alternatives. I put it to you that what you're looking for is a government that gives you that full support and chooses not to swither. It is time, ladies and gentlemen, to be bold. Thank you very much indeed.
Does this work? Thank you, Fergus, for a typically warm welcome and a demonstration of his continued enthusiasm for our industry, so most appreciated. We do have time for a few questions. Normal routine, we have some microphones roving. Please introduce yourself and keep your questions succinct. Any hands for questions? Got one down here on the front.
Oh,
Yeah.
Hello?
That's good.
You've heard the Minister this morning talk about the new guidance that's come out on the oil and gas leases. That's obviously designed to lessen uncertainty. How much would you see that uncertainty being undermined if there is indeed a yes vote in September with regard to Scotland?
Well, I don't see it being undermined in the slightest way whatsoever. Quite the opposite. I think our support for the oil and gas sector in Scotland has been unqualified, because we have in Scotland, 4 decades into oil and gas exploration activity in the North Sea, in Aberdeen and elsewhere, people who are world leaders in the industry. That has allowed us to acquire the expertise. Over the past full year, there has been record investment in oil and gas, £14 billion. And therefore, I think nobody could say that there has been a lack of investor confidence occasioned by the fact that we are holding a referendum. Quite the opposite. What the oil and gas industry needs, as Sir Ian Wood found in his recent report, is a fiscal regime which is stable and predictable, for precisely the same reason that I mentioned earlier, that those companies who invest, in many cases, several $billion in new fields need to know that they will receive their investment return over the lifetime of a project, not the lifetime of a political government. And therefore, stability and predictability is essential. The last point I make is that, yes, the UK is a bigger economy than Scotland, and yes, it is claimed that broad shoulders of the UK are essential to success. That is claimed. But the industry is much more important to Scotland than it is in the UK. And, of course, Norway has extracted oil over roughly the same period as the UK, 4 decades. over that period, and it has the same population as Scotland, it has built up an oil fund starting in 1996, which is now worth £500 billion sterling. The UK, over that period, has built up an oil fund of zero. So I don't think that size essentially matters. What matters is the correct government support for the oil and gas industry, as I argue it does for the offshore wind industry.
Thank you, Fergus. Another question at the back, up here.
I'm Theo Holton. My company is Wind Farm Analytics. My company is about data because we can gain a lot as an industry by building up large data sets. The Sparta database was mentioned, but we really need a lot more detail. So I think while that's a good start, maybe it would be possible for government to find a way of assisting the installation of advanced sensors on all offshore turbines, and in return, perhaps for some support for that, to make the database open, because you need large statistics. So just instrumented, one or two turbines instrumented, will not give you powerful results, particularly with regard to failure rates and component lifetimes.
Can you bring your question to a point?
So is it possible that government could consider supporting a standard set of advanced sensors on all wind turbines in order to advance the industry for O&M research, for performance research, etc.?
Thank you.
Well, the joy of politics is you do get a variety of questions, you know it. But I don't obviously have a knowledge of the technical aspects, but you know, my door is open, Theo, so why don't we get together and discuss this, and we can see what we need to do. And I've already said we need to work together to drive forward technological progress in this industry, and that means that government needs to make itself available to you and to listen carefully and to go away and, where appropriate, provide what support we can, and that's the approach that we take. So let's meet up reasonably soon and we'll discuss sensors together.
Well handled, Fergus. Thank you. Any other questions?
Hello. Yeah. James Ritchie from Techmar Energy. You may have already answered this, but I'm just going to ask it again because I don't think I quite understood. But have you given a clear commitment to the investors like Marubeni and the projects like Beatrice as to what you will do for the subsidies subject to a yes vote in the referendum?
Well, yes, we believe that all subsidies must continue to be honoured on an integrated UK energy market basis. And that also applies to, of course, the ROCs and FIT tariff regime. I mean, the only way in which a country, an advanced modern country, can become and be independent is to respect all property rights obligations. That is the only starting point. Anything else is wholly unacceptable, and therefore I'm pleased to confirm that. Now, plainly, there are matters to be negotiated with the UK government. If the UK energy market continues, as I believe it will, and most industry experts, incidentally, concur with that judgment for good engineering reasons, suddenly to stop the grid at the border between Scotland is engineering nonsense, frankly. So the operation of the continued market and the continued element of subsidy is absolutely essential. Now, it was earlier said that we are in the receipt in Scotland of a larger share of subsidies than our population share. In fact, the argument is 28% of subsidies, 10% of population, or 8 or 9% population. However, of course, there's another side to that equation. The Hinkley Point contract, for example, will provide subsidies for 20 years longer than renewable projects of £35 billion potentially, with a further £10 billion of loan guarantees. The Sellafield and other nuclear decommissioning costs are estimated at, I believe, of the order of £70,000 million. So on the other side of the equation is that work which is either required or scheduled to take place in England, to which we currently will be asked to make a contribution. So when I was at school studying arithmetic and algebra, there was two sides to every equation, and this is both sides of those equations. There are subsidies on either side of the border, and these are matters which are to be negotiated. You know, one thing I regret about the independence debate is it's become a little bit overheated. Recently, and I don't know if you've seen this, if you are not from Scotland you won't have seen this, but recently Alistair Darling of the No campaign compared our First Minister Alex Salmond to Kim Jong-il. I think by any stretch that's a little bit kind of exaggerated. I know he gets things done, of course, but you know, my view is this. After the heat of the campaign is over and there's a result, we will accept the result, yes or no, and then common sense and mature discussion and agreement will prevail.
Thank you, Fergus. Well, I think that's an appropriate note on which to close, which is slightly over time. So I'm sure you'll join me in extending our appreciation of thanks to Fergus for joining us this morning. Thank you.